to have ownership, patent rights, copyrights, trademarks. They would own them, and they also get frontmen, so that you may think this particular Argentinian really controlled this major corporation there, when behind the scenes it was really the Nazis. And the plan, the secret plan, was to come about in, quote, perhaps 2 generations, which would be about now. That's part of what's coming to pass.
When you see these things take place, and what really strikes me, and especially over the last 10 years, as a result of 9/11, we got the Patriot Act and a lot of, let's say, almost Orwellian-type controls by government, or almost a police state, start coming into play. Then with the financial crisis, we got the health care bill, which, you know, how that was related to the health care crisis, or the financial crisis, is beyond me. But we got these 2,000-page bills, the health care reform bill and the financial reform bill, bills so complex that we still don't even know what's contained in these bills, and congressmen freely admitted they never read it, and yet they passed it.
Yeah, Nancy Pelosi said, let's pass it and then we'll read it. It's curious. And the current deal, so to speak, doesn't take into account Obamacare and some of these other things. And in the first place, you can never lock in future Congresses. So in a couple of years, you know, it's virtually meaningless what they agreed to now. Plus, the budget of the CBO figures, which was established in 1974 when Nixon's got us off the gold standard, kicks in an automatic increase. So when they talk about these big cuts that we're going to have, which really aren't current, I mean, it's not currently, they're down the road, out years, and so on. What they're really talking about is cutting the rate of increase. So over 10 years or so, we'll have at least $7-8 trillion increase in the debt anyway. And regardless of this deal, I think Moody's either has or is about to reduce our rating. So that's going to kick in inflation. And so what you'll have is what they wanted all along is an increase in taxes. They just won't call it taxes. It'll be through inflation. But it'll amount to the same thing. And so all of this is, as you said, moving us towards a crisis, a debt crisis, and other economic crises, so that the people reluctantly will be in a position of accepting this global currency. Now, the dollar will still be around, just like the lira and pound and franc and so forth, but it won't be, it won't be worth anything. So at first, international transactions will be conducted through this global currency, and then it will be simply the accepted means for all financial transactions.
You know, it's amazing right now because we're talking about, and you heard in the budget debate, that we needed to have a balanced approach, meaning we needed to raise more taxes. And what I find amazing, the Wall Street Journal ran in their editorial section last week an article that I found astounding. And I'm just going to quote this to you. According to the most recent government data, today some 50.5 million Americans are on Medicaid, 46.5 million are on Medicare, 52 million are on Social Security, 5 million on SSI, 7.5 million on unemployment insurance, 44.6 million on food stamps, 24 million get a earned income credit, which is another welfare payment, and spending by the government from 1965 on these programs has gone from 28% to 66% of the federal budget. And not included in this is Obamacare, which will also place 30 million new Americans on government health care. On the revenue side, close to 50% of Americans don't pay, and I want to emphasize the difference, don't pay income tax. They may pay a Social Security tax if they have a job, but they don't pay income tax. So is this really part of the socialism plan? And how can you have half of the people in the country on some form of government pay or receiving a payment or entitlement and almost half not paying taxes? How does that work?
Well, as I indicated, it's all part of this plan. Woodrow Wilson said there's a power somewhere so complete, so pervasive, so interlocked, so watchful, you better not speak above your breath when you speak in condemnation of it. Then FDR, in the first year of his administration, wrote a letter to Wilson's chief advisor, Colonel House, saying the real truth of the matter is, as you and I know, that the financial element in our larger centers has owned, not just influenced, owned the government ever since the days of Andrew Jackson. And so what they do is, as you said about Orwell, they have a built-in constituency. You have a lot of boomers who are just starting to get Social Security and Medicare and so forth. And what that means is they're heavily dependent, not only upon whatever it is, Medicare, Medicaid, Social Security, but they're dependent upon the current the global economic situation. So, for example, let's say they object to jobs going overseas and so forth and so on. The problem is if you come back to the way it was previously, all of these major corporations are heavily invested overseas in their factories and capital expenses and so forth. And so to cut that off would mean a drop in their value on the stock market, which would then in turn hurt the baby boomers, 401ks. So they're not going to do that. And the translation of all that is, quote, they have come to love Big Brother. You have a built-in constituency to protect the current rate of payment to various people. Plus, as you said, the people who are unemployed or not paying any taxes, that is a built-in constituency for maintaining that. So that's why a lot of people are very, very reluctant in Congress to do anything to undermine that, even though they know that it's driving us over the edge. And so it's all very, very much part of a masterful plan that's going on, which no matter which way you go, we are going to have, by 2018, a global currency, and that will set us up for the world government managing the world economic situation, including trade.
Dennis, is this why, and it's this master plan, so-called, seems to be working? Because right after the Republicans won the November elections in 2010, there were a series of polls that were done by Fox, the Wall Street Journal, the Washington Post. And they asked Americans about their desire to see the budget balanced. And overwhelmingly, about 75% of Americans were well in favor of balancing the books. Well, then the pollsters took the question to a second level. Would you be in favor of balancing the books if it required cutbacks in Social Security, Medicare, and, of course, the entitlements that we were talking about? And then the polls flip-flopped. Very few Americans were in favor of doing anything to entitlements. And then another question was asked, and it was, do you believe if taxes should be raised on the wealthy that they pay more of their fair share of taxes in order to balance the budget? And, of course, overwhelmingly, the Americans said yes. So the way the debate is being framed for the public is somehow there is some rich guy out there that is basically getting away with not paying his taxes or not paying his fair share. And if only we can extract more revenues from this person, everybody can have all the goodies that they've been receiving from the government. And yet the IRS tables show that a small percentage of Americans pay the bulk of the country's income taxes.
Yeah, as I said, this is a multifaceted approach. First of all, they had to dumb down the public so they don't even understand what you just said, which unfortunately they don't. And then that was deliberate. And we, another time, another place, we can go into that. But what you have is, in the 80s, you would find commercials, and they changed from here are the 5 reasons to buy this tennis shoe to a sort of MTV associative, a psychological association, whereby, you'd show a pretty girl doing something, and you'd say, you would link it. Okay, I want to buy the product because the pretty girl's with the product, and you associate a good feeling with buying the product. And so you dumb down the people so that they can be manipulated psychologically. When I say these things in my various books, Secret Records Reveal, I actually put the quotes. 1928, Edward Bernays, the father of public opinion, as he's called, said, we have the power to manipulate you now. And there are examples as to how he did that. And so what you do is you present a psychological profile of the, quote, so-called rich. Never mind the fact that homeless people don't hire others. So it's the, quote, rich who are actually going to employ people, and we need to have unemployment solved primarily to get the economy rolling in the first place. Okay, but you present a picture of them, sort of like, you remember the book The Ugly American? So you present this picture and you use examples. You say, okay, here's what these people in Congress did. They're really bought by the fat cats, as they would call them. And there's various reasons why that could be believable. There's actually cartoon of John D. Rockefeller and Carnegie and J.P. Morgan welcoming Karl Marx. Why? Because they're really not capitalist free enterprise. They're monopoly capitalists. John D. Rockefeller said competition is a sin. So there is a difference between free enterprise capitalism, as most people see it, and what they call the fat cats, the J.P. Morgans, Carnegies, Rockefellers, and so on. And so the picture is presented, okay, Congress does their bidding. They pass laws which say, and this is true, they passed a law which said if you're a corporation and you keep your profits overseas, they won't be taxed. But if you bring your profits back into this country to build up, American jobs and so forth, they will be taxed. So here we have an incentive for these people to go overseas. And Congress passes this. People that, the average Americans have put into office, they pass these laws. So they present the psychological picture of these fat cats, so to speak. And so what happens is a sort of, back in the 60s, they used to call it what's in it for me. And that's why those polls that you mentioned show what they do. Do you want to balance the books? Oh, yeah, but not on my back. Don't you touch these certain entitlements. And so that's the attitude that's flowed now, and those people in the 60s are now the senior citizens, the boomers, and so on. And so what you do is you couple that with the ability of certain of these, quote, fat cats to transfer monies. I think Soros literally brought the country of Malaysia to its knees, because in a nanosecond, you can transfer billions of dollars into or out of the economies, the stock markets of various countries. So all of this stuff, including the people themselves, are manipulable.
And let's speak of these people like the Rockefellers and the Soroses. I think, when you read history, and I've read Tragedy and Hope, it's amazing when you look at the history books, whether it was World War I or it was World War II, you find Rockefeller interest or financial interest like J.P. Morgan that were supplying not only financing to our enemies, but also providing raw materials. For example, in your book, very few people are familiar or aware of the fact that Standard Oil was providing oil to the Nazis, or that, for example, Alcoa at one point was providing aluminum to the Nazis where it was unavailable for U.S. manufacturers.
Yeah, and that's part of the plan. Our ambassador, William Dodd, he wasn't, I guess, in on this. So there are a couple of letters and mentions in his diary from 1936 and 37 where he's writing back to the U.S. He's our ambassador to Germany at the time. And he's saying, I wonder why these corporations, American corporations, are putting all this money over here. They can't take the profits out of Germany and bring it back. I wonder why they're doing it. And the reason is we were deliberately, the power elite, as I call them, building up the Nazi Wehrmacht, the war-making machine. There were at least about 100 corporations which even into the war, even after the U.S. had ended the war, still had their people over in Germany helping in various ways. IBM was using the sort of what you would call the initial computer cards. They weren't called that. They had another name, but they were helping in that regard. You had, as you said, Standard Oil had, and I put this in my book, a memo written about certain of their ships on the way to the Canary Islands would actually have Nazi officers on board to be sure that those ships weren't sunk so that the Nazis could get the oil. There were also various agreements. You had Henry Ford was enamored of Adolf Hitler. Same thing with Irene DuPont. DuPont controlled General Motors at the time. In fact, there's a memo, for example, from 1937, November 23rd, where representatives of General Motors held a secret meeting in Boston with a Baron Manfred von Killinger, and he was in charge of West Coast espionage for the Nazis. And here he is in Boston, and the Baron, also Baron von Tippelkirch, and what was a Nazi consul general and Gestapo leader in Boston. And what that group is, they signed a joint agreement showing a total commitment to the Nazi cause for the immediate and indefinite future. And so they would produce certain things and not produce the same things for the British. So there was a definite effort to build up the Nazi war machine. And what you have is a dialectical process. Like I said, the idea is to synthesize Western capitalism and Eastern communism into a world socialist government. And so in terms of the Rockefellers, for example, you'll find that David Rockefeller is very, very friendly with the communists, Chairman Mao, Fidel Castro, and so on. But Nelson Rockefeller was the one who was working with the Nazis.
You know, it's amazing there was an article published in Foreign Affairs, and I'm not quite sure of the date because it's been well over a decade. It might have been 91 or 92, and it was called The Rule of the Wise Men.